U.S. Supreme Court says that Alabama illegally tried to stop, silence, limit the voices of Black voters by how they drew their lines. Let's put up the picture of the justices. The Supreme Court, in a surprise decision for many, ruled that Alabama diluted the power of Black voters by drawing congressional voting map lines with a single district in which they made up a majority. Chief Justice John Roberts Jr. wrote the majority opinion in the 5-4 ruling. He was joined by Justice Brett Kavanaugh and the court's 3 liberal members. Now, this was really interesting because that combination typically doesn't happen for major legislation or major cases. The case was part of a pitched battle over redistricting playing out across the country. Civil rights leaders say the redistricting process often disadvantages growing minority communities. Republican state officials say the Constitution allows only a limited role for the consideration of race in drawing voting districts. The case started after Alabama's legislature, which is controlled by Republicans, decided to redraw the congressional map to take account of the 2020 census. The state has 7 congressional districts, and its voting age population is about 27% Black. The new map maintained a single district in which Black voters made up a majority. That district has long elected a Democrat, while the state's other 6 districts are represented by Republicans only. After Black voters and advocacy groups challenged the map under the Voting Rights Act, the landmark civil rights decision enacted in 1965 to protect minority voters, a unanimous 3-judge panel of the Federal District Court in Birmingham ruled the legislature should have fashioned a second district in which Black voters either comprise a voting age majority or something quite close to it. The panel found that voting in the state is racially polarized, and that it would be possible to draw a second reasonably configured district to allow Black voters to elect their favorite candidates. Last year, the Supreme Court temporarily blocked the lower court's ruling by a 5-4 decision, ensuring that the 2022 election would take place using the legislature's map, the one with the single district in which Black voters were in the majority. So what has happened? Well, number one, they've basically said, that last election y'all had, it was kind of wrong. It was wrong. But no changes would take place. Moving forward, you're going to have to do better. Now, why is this even a thing? It's a thing because the Supreme Court made it a thing. Remember the Voting Rights Act? Well, before, we had to get what's called pre-clearance. If certain states, Alabama being one of them, wanted to change the electorate law, they had to get pre-clearance from the Department of Justice. That was part of the act. And then the Supreme Court decided to gut it and say, this is no longer a Supreme Court issue. This needs to go back to the United States Congress. And because of that, they eliminated the requirement of pre-clearance. So in order for any justice to be had as it relates to changing of the voting lines, a court filing needs to take place typically after they make the lines permanent. And then the legal process starts. Well, by that time, guess what? Damage has been done. All right, Jordan, thoughts here?
We're lucky. We're extremely lucky, and I think it shows just how fragile fundamental rights like this, especially voting rights, are when you have this cobbled together majority with Roberts writing the decision, correct. Kavanaugh only agreeing in part. I mean, that's what got us here. But both of them acknowledging like this isn't gonna last forever. I mean, Roberts himself said like this is like we still shouldn't be doing this, but this was just so egregious and so bad, essentially, that like they're not gonna let this map stay in place. But we're not out of the woods yet. Like the states are gonna keep trying to gerrymander these districts until they have complete outsized control in all of these states. And eventually they're going to find some formula that works. And all the conservative justices are going to agree. The 3 liberal justices that we have now are going to be completely outnumbered. And we're just going to be throwing pebbles at bulletproof glass because they have packed the court with right-wing ideologues who don't care about the law, don't care about people's fundamental rights, and they're just going to rewrite history, overturn precedent, and just completely continue gutting the Voting Rights Act. I mean, this is ridiculous. We're still living in this, essentially they want to revert back to a Jim Crow era of voting rights. It's just, or the lack thereof.
Yep.
It's really sad, and it spells disaster when we have 3 people and there's no clear opportunity in the next year or two where they could even replace one conservative justice. So we better hope that a Democrat remains the president, whoever that is. And also maybe we can change the dynamic of the court. One way to do that, if they really want to put a full faith effort into it, you could try packing the Supreme Court. But who knows if that'll get through the Senate because of Democratic senators. It's just very frustrating right now.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, the right now Supreme Court sees the wisdom in the Supreme Court of the 60s that said pre-clearance was required.